Coming up, time to take out the calculators in Brooklyn as we break down 240 minutes. Who's deserving of starting rotations? Who's coming off the bench? And how does Brooklyn build that big starting five coming up this season? We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marmrick. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day and let you know that we're 100% free on all those great platforms and that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms, they do apply, Doug, but no terms need apply to discussing breaking down the minute shares for the Nets as currently constituted heading into the upcoming season.
Oh, buddy, there's almost nothing I like more. Nothing I like more than predicted minutes for a rotation down to every team. As listeners of the podcast will know, I do this for full time every single night in the NBA for every single team. Just try to figure out where their minutes are going to go on a nightly basis. So being able to start the process in August rather than October is always a fun one. And Adam got in on the gig this time around too. And this is something, a practice that, we do it to, content, obviously, but it's also instructive to start, seeing how we're thinking about the team in general, how minutes and rotations are going to break down, where we differ. So I'm excited for this one. I'm sure we will do other ones like this as time goes on, as either trades happen or camp news, and as we get closer to the season. But in general, yeah, let's take a look at how we see as presently constituted.
Yes,
how the Nets minutes break down, because we're alike in some ways. We're actually pretty different in some others.
Yeah, and I think as we get into the nitty gritty of the minutes, it's going to be interesting too. But starting five, let's go ahead and hit those here right out of the gate. Where on the left, if you're watching visually, is going to be Doug. On the right is going to be my starting five. So you mentioned it there. We're not that different in terms of Schroeder, Thomas, Claxton, Johnson are all going to be in the starting lineup. You go with Dorian Finney-Smith in the starting five as currently constituted. I say it's time for the rookie. Give me Noah Clowney plugged in at the 4. And then from a minute standpoint, we can also get into a little bit where we differentiate here, which I think is going to speak to philosophically what I want to see the Nets do here when it comes to getting through these games and getting through some late game minutes as well.
Yeah, so this one, I did actually struggle with this one. I didn't struggle with Cam Thomas and Dennis Schroeder. You're a little higher on, I'm a little higher on Schroeder's minutes than you are, which, we can get into. In general, though, that was pretty clear, point guard, shooting guard. Cam Johnson, I think we're both pretty clear on, he starts at the 3 and Claxton starts at the 5. So I think that those ones were pretty easy. Who starts at the 4 is an interesting, probably just breaks down more philosophically than it does along talent lines. And, so our first disagreement is just who starts. I have Dorian Finney-Smith starting right now, and you have Noah Clowney starting right now. I thought about starting Clowney, but ultimately sided with the DFS angle. If he's still on the team and if they were trying to trade him, putting him in the starting lineup, it wouldn't be shock me if Clowney ended up playing more minutes than him, but that he was the nominal starter, and it's okay. And you say to Clowney, look, you're 19 or whatever, you're 20, you're young, he's a veteran, that's what we're going to do, and that's just the way it's going to be. And I think if Clowney was year 3, then I it would be a different story here for me. But year 2, where he really only played at the end of the year, I think that there is a very easy story to tell here that's just he's just a backup still, right? And I know Nets fans some are just going to jump ugly at that idea because they see him as the future, and they see him as, maybe even more talented and higher upside than DFS. I think all those things are very obvious, but in the end of the day, what people sometimes fail to recognize is you're running a team, but you're also running a business, and you have to be in the business of ego management and just sort of hierarchy and stuff like that. So I default to DFS, but I do not have him for a ton of minutes relative to a regular starter in the NBA, right?
Yeah.
23 minutes for a starter is just nothing. And so it was kind of me hedging on, I think he starts, but I don't think he's some huge minutes guy. I think it's mostly just kind of for the name and maybe trying to trade him too.
Yeah, and we'll get into this when we break down some of the minutes on the bench for me when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith. But I just think, and you said it, it's a limited run at the end of the season. It's something to get very excited about when it comes to Noah Clowney. But at some point when I was doing these minutes breakdowns, it did come down to this is the rebuild and it is about player development. And I don't want to, Doug has good minutes for Noah Clowney, by the way, anyway. So it's not like he's burying him or something and he's not still going to get his run. I put Noah Clowney at 26 minutes. I put him in the starting lineup because I think it's just such a clear-cut difference between these two players. And when it comes to Dorian Finney-Smith, I think, 2 years ago and last year we talked about, well, you got to have him in there, trade value. What's it going to look like? I just don't. Don't worry about it as much anymore now because it is what it is. You've had him on the roster for too long. Whatever his value is going to be, it's kind of set now in some ways. And even if he's coming off the bench, and I have him for a very low minute total that we'll get into and the reasons why. But even if he's coming off the bench, I don't think that really changes perceptually around the league what his value is to a championship run team. Like, I wonder if anyone's going to look into Brooklyn and look at who's starting or not, or who's coming off the bench and apply it to whether or not that player has value for them, because it's such a different set of circumstances. If anything, maybe it goes against what you're thinking is Dorian Finney-Smith is a veteran player who's over 30 years old. Why would Brooklyn over dedicate time to him? Now, we've gone through this before with symbolic starts for players, and that's a little bit, I think, of what you're speaking to. But for me, I would plug in Clowney. I would start to get him the run now. I want to look back at the end of this year, and I don't want to be thinking about what a lot of Nets fans thought about with Cam Thomas. Why didn't he get more run early in his career? Why were we so slow to bring him along? And if you're Jordy Fernandez, you have to look at the versatility of a guy like Noah Clowney and think that upside and that value is there for this team.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all, and we're gonna get into some of this bench stuff too in a little bit, but I do think it's worth. And by the way, we haven't mentioned Ben Simmons, who neither of us had him starting. We're gonna get to him shortly here.
That might be a shocker for a lot of people. Who knows?
And, and that could look super wrong too. But I think that the idea of starting Clowney over both Ben Simmons and Dorian Finney-Smith is just to start the season. It's just not how it's just. That is actually a harder story to tell than just starting the veterans. I think that no one would go crazy about that with the idea hey, when we reach game 50, things are going to look different, right? Mm-hmm. Just like when they reached game 70 last year, things looked a lot different. I mean, with Cam Thomas coming off the bench, things change. I'm just talking about starting the season where you are paying lip service to the veterans. I think those things are important. And I think for a team, I don't think that starting Dorian Finney-Smith is going to win them games. I don't think starting Ben Simmons would win them a lot of games. So I don't think it's a matter of, whatever. I just think that maybe I'm just valuing values wrong word. Maybe I'm just emphasizing what I think to be what happens in the locker room more than just maybe what the talent should delineate, how they should be delineated along talent lines. I just think it's no one in the locker room would push back on Noah Clowney. I actually just think it would be weird. I think it'd be weird if he started over these guys. That's just my my gut take on it. I just think it would. Yeah, go ahead.
No, because that's I think where the conversation we're going to have, and probably the conversation that a lot of Nets fans are having. It's do I care about that perceptual thing in the locker room if we both agree on the premise that Dorian Finney-Smith and Cam Johnson, they're not going to be here, and Bogdanovich is not going to be here ultimately. If all of these veterans are ultimately not going to be here, it does feel starkly different than whether the superstar era or even last season when you had Mikal Bridges and saying, hey, we know what we're trying to do here. We know what we want to compete for. In some ways, if I was Cam Johnson, he's a unique figure in this to me. But if you came to him and said, hey, we're going to play you 20 to 25 minutes a night, you're not going to play late game minutes because we're going to get blown out a lot, and we're going to try to trade you. We're going to try to get you someplace better. If you're Cam Johnson, who has injury history, I probably give the nod and go, yeah, I kind of appreciate that over utilizing me. And we've seen this before. You play all these veterans, the team's really bad. Guess what? And this could be a philosophy for the Nets that makes sense. You guys take all the blow of being a bad team when the team is losing and getting blown out. Even with the veterans, it doesn't work. And then it sets up this beautiful transition to the youth at some point where you say, hey, even when we played the best, the most experienced players we had on our roster, this team was built for the rebuild. They're built to lose games. And now we make the transition. I just figure in some regards, do it now, right? Do it now, rip off the Band-Aid. But we'll get into the weeds here a little bit on other minutes and maybe where I could be wrong here. And by the way, Doug is the more experienced person than this, as he said at the top. So I may be leaning too heavily into what the fan base is stirring up inside them and agreeing in some ways, but getting lost a little bit in an internal narrative over maybe league-wide standards that have held, right?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think honestly, and we'll get into we'll kind of move off this and some of these other guys here in a second. I honestly think almost the safer way to do this, except for Cam Thomas, would just be to sort by salary. And and like
all the money.
Sort by salary and to make that the starting lineup. I because that is much more relevant within the locker room. I'm like much more relevant within like the facility than probably anything else. Should it matter? No, but for the way the way this team is going, sorting by salary might actually just be the safest way to make the starting lineup. And I think that would be like totally reasonable. All right, we're gonna get into some more of this. I want to talk about some of the guys, like where we see some of these bench minutes, which is where we start to differ. Some of like the harder parts, which I think this was not the easiest exercise, and I would encourage everyone to try this on their own. We'll get into that here in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, formula for winning championships. Not for the Nets this year, but for everyone else, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, so much more. Maybe it's speed, maybe it's power, maybe it's style. eBay has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home those huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, so as we continue today's on Locked On Nets episode, talking about that 240 breaking it down. So already Doug and I have a little bit of a differentiating. We have a different look. Boy,
There you go, buddy.
Don't worry, there's a word in there somewhere at our starting five. Back up on the screen there if you're watching over on YouTube. But Schroeder, Thomas, Johnson, Finney-Smith, and Claxton for Doug. I go Schroeder, Thomas, Johnson, Clowney, and Claxton on my side. And then obviously minute breakdowns is really where in all of these starting players, I trended a little bit lower on guys like Schroeder, 6-minute difference there. Like Johnson, you go 28. I went 24. And then obviously when I put Clowney in, I even have him earmarked at a few minutes higher than you had for Finney-Smith in the starting lineup. Let's start with two things I want to hit on here: the Ben Simmons of it, because I think it matters, and then also the Nicholas Claxton of it, because this is actually where you and I were spot on with one another, and I wonder how fans think about that next year of Nicholas Claxton. But Ben Simmons wise, neither one of us in the starting lineup. If 100% healthy, we talk about all these things all the time. Why, based on your line of thinking, why not then Ben Simmons in the starting lineup if he's the veteran? And if you follow the money, Doug, boy, that guy's making a lot of it.
I think they're just going to have the out with the injury. I think they're going to have the out. I think that like the conventional wisdom would say based on the salary sorting, which now that I've said it out loud, I do think that is like the most logical way to go with some of these teams or some like bad teams. Just sort by salary, make that the starting lineup, basically go by minutes, unless someone's like like you overwhelmingly need the guy in the lineup like Cam Thomas, right? Sure. Other than that, with Simmons, I think that the reason I felt comfortable going on like sort of the lower side with him, I actually went 23. Maybe that's even too high, but I was like hedging a little bit that I might be wrong about the starting lineup thing. Is that I think that with the injury recovery, they'll have the out again where it's like, hey, we're going to bring you off the bench. We want to work you up to game speed. You haven't played in forever. You're not, it's not ready. We're working you into the mix. I think like, unlike say Dorian Finney-Smith, right? Unlike maybe some other veterans, you have this injury narrative that you can sort of ride on that doesn't make it as hard for him not to start. And it's not like he was like some overwhelmingly great performer before he got injured. It's been a total mess. And like, you just don't need to, it's not one of those things like, oh, you lost your starting job and you were crushing it because of like, it's not like, Drew Bledsoe, Tom Brady here, right? Where it's like, hey, you were pretty good, but this other guy just happens to be better. It just wasn't amazing anyway. And so I think when you factor that into the injury part, they just have a very easy story to tell. That just say, hey, let's work you into this and get you up to full speed. And whether he gets there or not, I mean, if he does, great. But I just don't think he doesn't have the same narrative problem that these other guys do. It's just been so bad / nothing for so long. Like, I don't think he's lost all cachet. Like, there's no way he steps into the building in my mind. And like, can demand a starting spot. It would actually feel psychotic almost.
And the contrast between, say, him and Cam Johnson, it's like, hey, there's the world where you're sitting here after we all believe it's get behind Cam Thomas time here, but he's the most experienced, maybe the most talented, the guy in theory, if healthy, that you would trust the most to have value for this team even now, whereas Ben Simmons is the polar opposite of that. So as we throw up minutes here for some of these backups, because you said 23, I have Ben Simmons at 15 minutes. Like
Yeah,
I tried to. Yeah, I know. And by the way, guess what? Like, I know that it's probably too low. Like, there's a reality that's too low. And the problem that I ran into here, when we throw up this visual, it's going to look very clean on my side in terms of the hierarchy of where they went. I grabbed guys for Doug here that just from the minute standpoint, where he's sending some of these. So Simmons 23 for him. I'm only giving him 15. I put Bogdanovich up there for you, even though the number is incorrect right now. You have him at 17 in terms of his minute shares going into the season. I put that up there for a specific reason when it comes to me. Watford, you and I both have him in there. I go 20 with him. And then you have Clowney for the 21. Sharp, we both kind of agree on here too. 14 for you, 16 for me. And the reason why, when I think about Ben Simmons and that minute share, okay, 15 minutes a night. All right, you're 3.5 minutes a quarter, 3 to 4 minutes a quarter. Like, it's not a lot. But how often, and I did the same thinking with any veteran, how often, how many nights are we going to be in a fourth quarter of a game where the Nets are clearly losing and going to lose, and you're now ready to go ahead and give all the young guys more run, or go deeper into the bench and look at some fringe guys that you think you want to see if they still have something left in them. We'll talk about some of those deeper cut guys. That's where I also look at minutes and just think, how many nights are we going to say Ben Simmons in the fourth quarter leading the Nets charge? It just doesn't seem realistic. And if I believe that Cam Thomas is in line to get more of an opportunity to do on-ball work, and if I believe a guy like Trendon Watford is ready to get back to where the minute share should be for him going back to his Portland days, all of these things keep coalescing where you go, so where am I going to take minutes away from to give Ben Simmons his 20? And that's where I kept running into a problem and maybe back myself down lower than I should have. But I'm not going to give more minutes to Ben Simmons than I absolutely feel like I have to while he's on this roster.
Yeah, I think that like that's reasonable. I was gonna say like I want my numbers probably a little high, at least to start the season too. Like for my own admission, like I think that like in the 20s is tough. Again, it was a bit of a hedge on. I just am not totally positive, sort of like how they view him in the building now. My guess is what I was saying before is correct around like not starting him. And if I'm wrong, like I'd rather be wrong a little bit on the higher side. So
sure.
I think that like it could easily be 18. My guess is if I had a bet right now, I'd put it somewhere right in the middle between both of us, somewhere around 18, 19 minutes and call it a day and say like that feels like a fair number. The problem that I ran into with this team, the two issues, I think the one reason it's like a little easier to give Simmons minutes is, in my mind, it was very hard to find backup guard minutes in this line with this team. And we're not exactly sure sort of how some of this is going to shake out with the guards. And I want to go back to Bogdanovich here in a second, but like with the guards piece, I don't know how you felt about this, but when I was like thinking about this, not from a rotations perspective, but not just from a minutes perspective, but also a rotations perspective, it was hard to figure out sort of like where these guards minutes go. Now, some of this will will shake out when we know exactly like who makes the team. Like we have some non-guaranteed guys like Killian Hayes, like Keon Johnson. I'm pretty sure Shake Milton's fully guaranteed here. So like I kind of hedged along just basically splitting it up between those guys. But I don't know. How did you feel when you thought about these guard minutes? Because that's actually why I ticked Simmons up a little bit. Because I was like, well, they just don't really have much in the way of guards. And maybe that's where he just finds a few extra minutes here and there.
That's the conundrum of the roster. Because say you want to play Cam Thomas at the guard, at the starting guard. Okay, but you know that Schroeder, when he's on the floor, you want to have him in a certain role. Now you get to the bench. Well, who's going to be your on-ball leader? We've talked about how Trendon Watford has some of that skill set, but we're never going to trick ourselves into thinking that's going to be a part of the process, a point forward role for him in the vein of a Ben Simmons. So then when you get down the list here, and it's actually one of the other spots that we differentiated a bit was where when it came to the backcourt rotation minutes, I ended up going with Keon Johnson coming out of his summer league, feeling like he showed something, feeling like he's earned something. I earmarked him for 12 minutes a night. Now that's, now if you put that on par next to Ben Simmons, you say 15 minutes for Ben Simmons, 12 for Keon Johnson. Maybe it looks weird, but in my mind, because of the way this backcourt looks, he's the next logical guy to get a run here in that backcourt, maybe sometimes along Cam Thomas. Maybe you see how he looks when the ball is in his hands as well. And that can be both because I like what I saw from the summer in him, and also because, former first round pick as well, same draft class as Cam Thomas, and also because there's nobody else to put the ball in the hands of here on this roster with any reasonable expectation.
Yeah, and this is again, like I kind of just divvied it up between Killian Hayes and Milton and Keon Johnson, just because I kind of wasn't sure. That was me admitting I'm just not totally sure, sort of like how this ends up shaking out. I think we'll understand a lot more of this when we get the training camp. I actually think it'll be pretty clear come training camp and comes the preseason around like who's running with the second team, and we just basically earmark it at that point.
Yeah,
but
like you'll just see the units
with Keon Johnson. I basically just didn't want to be a prisoner of the moment because he was like the most front of mind guy because of summer league, because there are just other guys. The story is though it's all kind of bad. Like the backup guard minutes it's not good. I mean, by design, but this is easily their weakest point, as opposed to where you go with the wings, where it's like, hey, we got Clowney, we got Jalen Wilson, we got Bogdanovich, we got kind of Ben Simmons sort of fits in there. We got Trendon Watford. We have, there's Zaire Williams still, kind of hiding back here. There's like DFS. There's too many guys almost at the wing, at the threes and the fours, and not enough of the guards. So anyway, we'll get into a little bit more of this in a second here. Do you want to shoot something real quick?
No, just going to say coming up, who did I have basically not getting the court time at all that afforded me to give out some bigger minutes to some young players? We'll break down the differences there coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you reference over at Gametime. Look, it's MLB season all during the summer. It's hot outside. That means heading to the MLB. I'm saying it like I've never been to a game. Headed to the baseball game. You want to get into the action over here with Gametime. They got it all going on. They make it as easy as possible to get tickets. They got a ton of stuff coming up in the New York area. You got Rangers and Yankees coming up here on Friday, starting at $21. Go find me a better deal than that heading over to Yankee Stadium. Gametime's got you hooked up. They're going to make sure that you can see exactly what you're going to see when you sit down. They got last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% by buying last-minute tickets. It's not just for baseball games either. Concerts, comedy, theater. It's all there. Flash deals, zone deals, all in pricing, lowest price guarantee. Love to hear that too. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA, $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA over at Gametime. You're going to get $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.
All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about 240 minutes, the starting lineups, the breakdowns, where does it all go? As I said there in the second segment, there's a reason why I'm able to, when I go over and look, as I'll throw back up the secondary minutes here coming in off the bench for both of us. There's a reason why when I look at my minutes, I can say, well, I'm getting Keon Johnson 12 minutes. And we already said before, because I'm only giving Dorian Finney-Smith 12, and he's coming off the bench for me. If I only give Ben Simmons 15 minutes, and I only give Day'Ron Sharpe 16 minutes, that's how I get Jalen Wilson his 24, Noah Clowney his 26, Cam Thomas, I went 1 minute higher, but his 34 minutes, right? The difference here is, though, I looked at, and maybe the same way you talk about a lack of confidence or for Ben Simmons, injuries, etc. The Bogdanovich piece to me, listen, it's very easy to say, like, he's going to be in the mix, he'll be on the court, he's a veteran, all this stuff. He's 35 years old. He had multiple injuries last season. I didn't give him any minutes. Like, I don't know if he'll even be on this roster. And I know you probably say the same thing, obviously. But even if he is, I can see a world, as you mentioned, with all the congestion in that front court. Man, could I see it very easy to be like, yeah, you're the old veteran sitting at the end of the bench. Like, good for you. Clap your hands. Give somebody a towel when they call a timeout. And at some point, you won't be on this roster. And by doing that, you start to create these opportunities to have real run for the young players. But even beyond that, you and I saw differences when it came to guys like Zaire Williams, Shake Milton, Killian Hayes. You said hedging a little bit. I gave them a couple of minutes apiece, but you actually gave Zaire 10, right? Coming into this, looking like you think he would get some run to get a sample size.
Yeah, that might be overshooting it a little bit here. I'm not exactly sure. If I were to go back on this, I'd probably just like kick him down to like 7 and take Jalen Wilson up to like 15 or 16 or something like that. Like, just because I trust that those minutes are going to be there a little bit more. Yeah. Again, like with these bad teams, I'm willing to hedge a little bit more because they just don't need to be locked into anybody, right? Sure. When you go to, when you do these exercises with, let's say, the Sixers, right? Or actually a better example would be the Celtics on a night-to-night basis, where it's like, I know what the 8 guys are going to be. Right. And I can maybe throw 5 minutes to an O'Shea Brissett or something like that just to like make sure I get the 240. But for the most part, it's the starting 5. It's Peyton Pritchard. It's Sam Hauser. We call it basically an Al Horford, and we call it a day. right? But like with these bad teams, it never pays to be overconfident. For this, I know for sure it never pays to be overconfident with anybody, because one, you're just not running your guys into the ground. Two, they're getting lots of different looks at lots of different guys, and you end up with situations a la like what happened with Memphis last year. It's like, hey, good luck. Who's playing tonight?
Yeah.
I don't even know who's up from the G League. I can't
Right.
even keep track of who's coming back and forth to even be on the team, to be in a uniform where you're waiting to game time. I think the Nets are going to be much more in a situation like that, which is why I went probably a little heavier on some of these lower end guys. And when it comes to Bogdanovich, again, I think this one is another one that we'll know clearly. I actually do think it's pretty polarizing. It's either going to be the minutes are going to be kind of there, or it's going to be zero. I don't think it's easy to forget he was decent when he was on Detroit, right? And that was not that long ago.
Yeah.
Then he gets the Knicks rotation. It's not working with Tibbs. He gets hurt and it's over. And you're like, oh, is it over? Or was it Knicks over? And sometimes Tibbs over. Sometimes Tibbs over is different than over. And that's another one where I'm like, I'll be much more confident around this once we get to more solid news about what his status is.
Yeah.
I wasn't willing to go zero, but I'm not going to be he's not going to start or anything either. But I don't know. Actually, if he started, it wouldn't shock me, but I don't think it's going to be the case.
Yeah, I would be blown away if that was the case. I thought a couple of things I want to get to here real quick before we close out. Going back just to the starting lineup and just noting, Doug and I only have two players each, Cam Thomas, Nicholas Claxton, that played 30 minutes or more on this roster. Doug goes more heavily into the veterans in Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and even Ben Simmons to that extent, with their minute shares being 28, 23, 23. I bump up guys like Jalen Wilson. I think the one clear mistake that I'd probably go back and look at right now is Dennis Schroeder and not bumping up his minutes a bit more, just because even at 24, when you talk about the thin nature of the backcourt, it's hard to not look like a veteran who's getting MVP chance over in Germany right now for the Olympics, not seeing a bigger bump there, because you need that presence in a way that maybe I don't think you need other veterans. But you and I, a couple of things. Any reason to go into why Nicholas Claxton 30 minutes again? Because I just don't see the world where Nicholas Claxton is a 35-minute, 33, 34-minute night guy. It just doesn't seem like he's been built to be that in the course of his early career.
Well, I mean, to clarify, I had Nick Claxton at 29 minutes. So
I had him at 30. You had him at 29. You're right there. His career average is right there on par with that. 29, 30, 31 minutes a little bit last season for stretches, but we've never seen a consistent run like that where he's playing 32 and 33 enough.
I just don't think it's going to be the case. I don't think they're going to need to do it. I think that he doesn't grade out as a guy. He's got always these centers, foul trouble bites these guys too. So sure. you can tick down true centers just based on foul trouble. There's other reasons to kind of get lower on a guy like him. He's not some amazing two-way center either. You have Sharp there. You can play Clowney at the 5. There's just lots of other reasons for him to go a little lower.
And the last one for me here, you mentioned just right there, Sharp. It's funny, man. The last season was maybe supposed to be this version of him and the expansion of his game. And instead, we both kind of look at him and go, I don't know, how can I possibly give you more than 14 to 16 minutes a night based on the way things went, especially down the stretch. Yes. After it was all over, you still did not see him get big minutes. And that's actually the way I carved out some extra for a guy, say, like Trendon Watford in all of this.
That's the biggest question with him, too. It's what did the end of last season mean? We all thought he was going to play a ton when they really, when they kind of just raised the white flag.
Yep.
He didn't. And that was very confusing at the time about why that wasn't the case. And so he's another one. He could be 1 minute. He could be zero. I don't really know. The end of last season, I just am not sure what that really spelled for him. That should have been the time where he was maybe getting a spot start and playing some real minutes. And he was completely buried at times. And so I'm just not really 100% sure how they view him overall. So anyway, fun exercise. I think that again, I'd encourage everyone, just go make a simple thing and just go put all the guys on the roster and add it up to 240 minutes and think about real ways that this gets, because everyone always comes back and says, I'll tell you right now what happens. Everyone comes back and says you're wrong. Okay, I'm done. Whatever. But
by the way, get over on YouTube and get in the comments about that. Let us know,
Here's the one caveat to that.
Okay.
Caveat. Again, always in for constructive praise, as I call it.
I love constructive praise.
Always interested in constructive compliments. But I would say, before you fire off the message that says you're wrong about something, it's fine. It's fine to do it. Go and do your own 240 minutes first. That's my only ask, is just you go heck it into your calculator
Yeah.
and type in and get it to 240 minutes with the players first, then fire off and say we're wrong. But let me just at least know that you did the exercise.
And I'll know right now as we get out the door. I know right now because Doug's done this professionally for a very long time. As a guy doing it at more of a, let's call it a novice level, I started firing off minutes and then looked down. And I was like, okay, got to back a few things out here. Got to start to sort it out as you try to spread them around accurately.
And make sure it makes sense with the 5 guys that can be on the court when you do it. Like, make sure, make sure the 5 that you have on there makes sense too. Anyway, that's my only ask. All right, we're going to get out of here. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets wherever you listen to the podcast. Go over to YouTube if you wanted to see how we broke down some of these minutes. You'll see them over there. Subscribe where you listen. Subscribe over on YouTube.
The numbers don't always tell the whole story. That is Felipe Rivers.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball by the numbers. Basketball, yeah.